From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
We've come to Buckingham Palace in highly unusual circumstances. Normally, we'd be discussing your work, your duty. We'll come on to that. But today, you've chosen to speak out for the first time. Why have you decided to talk now?
Because there is no good time to talk about Mr. Epstein and all things associated. We've been...
Well, when was it? It will have been November 2019.
5 years ago.
5 years ago that the interview actually aired. I mean, can you remember where you were watching it?
Absolutely, I can. I was working for a Sunday newspaper at the time, and I had a phone call on the Saturday afternoon and said there had been this rumour that Newsnight had this big interview with Prince Andrew. And then it was made clear that it was going to be aired that Saturday night. And I had a phone call from a friend of mine who works on Newsnight and said, look...
a mole?
Well, an officially sanctioned mole, let's say. So I got the transcript in my inbox, in my email inbox, of all the things he'd said. And I had to call the source back up and said, look, are you sure you sent me the right thing? Because there's all sorts of weird stuff in here about how he doesn't sweat and strange kind of alibis about his behaviour. There's something about Pizza Express in Woking. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. And, you know from another journalist when they've got a really, really good scoop because their voice sort of starts to quaver and shake a little bit and they're... you can hear almost the adrenaline in their voice. And I thought, they've got something really good, absolutely stonking. And then, of course, we were watching it in the office.
Do you regret the whole friendship with Epstein?
Now, still not. And the reason being is that the people that I met and the opportunities that I was given to learn either by him or because of him.
And I'd already written the key quotes for my piece and then was updating it with the kind of colour of what he looked like and how his demeanour was, which was something that no transcript could tell you, but was almost as interesting or as important as what he was saying on the camera.
And what was your takeaway from watching it?
He's toast. It's over for Andrew.
Since that grilling, Emily Maitlis holding Prince Andrew to account over his friendship with the now-dead paedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew's life has changed. He's not a working royal anymore, and his days, it seems, are taken up by horse riding and TV watching. Probably not repeats of the interview, or the Netflix dramatisation of it, or Amazon's version out tomorrow. How will the royals weather yet another rehashing of this embarrassing episode? And could Prince Andrew even fall further?
I think the King's feeling is that in a world in which everybody's watching their pennies and the cost of living is going up, is it really appropriate that he is spending £5 million plus a year to keep Andrew in Royal Lodge, this vast estate?
The story today. The King's Prince Andrew problem just got bigger.
I'm Kate Mansey, assistant editor and royal editor at The Times.
That was 5 years ago, that Newsnight interview now, and there's still so many question marks over Prince Andrew, what he's doing, how he's living, and, well, I guess the sort of key thing at the moment is where he's living.
Mm-hmm. He's still at Royal Lodge, of course. This is the big estate in Windsor, where he lives with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, who's still very much part of his life in that respect. They're not a couple anymore, but they still share this huge property, which is being funded from the private funds from his brother, the King, who's funding his lifestyle, funding his security, and enabling him to continue to live there in that luxurious lifestyle, frankly, even though he doesn't have a job, no discernible income beyond his Royal Navy pension, and existing solely from the payouts from the King.
And I don't know, there's focus again and again and again on him because of, well, not just the interview that 5 years ago, but then the first dramatisation and now this second dramatisation. You've already seen it. I mean, how is it different from the other one?
So Scoop was the first one that came out, and that was the Netflix show.
Thursday, 2 p.m, the Palace. 2 chairs in the middle of the floor, 6 feet apart.
That was very much from Sam McAllister's point of view. She was one of the producers who was part of the Newsnight team who got the scoop, who got the big interview with Andrew. And it was very much her take on it, how she got it and persuaded people to talk to her. This is Emily Maitlis's point of view. So Emily Maitlis is the presenter who interviewed the Prince on Newsnight. And this is more coming from her side of things.
Emily Maitlis, BBC.
I've been warned about you. You have a bit of a reputation.
Well, for you, I'll try and behave.
So this is Amazon, the other streaming giant. So everyone's got skin in the game with this story. And this is a 3-parter. So it's not 1 2-hour kind of movie, made-for-TV movie, which was what Scoop was. A Very Royal Scandal is this Amazon version. It's going to be airing very soon and all around the world.
And Michael Sheen is Prince Andrew in this one. It was Rufus Sewell, wasn't it, in the
That's
Netflix
right.
one? How is Michael Sheen different? I mean, what's his spin on Prince Andrew?
Well, I think Rufus Sewell, when he played Prince Andrew in Scoop, was very keen to say that he wanted to present the Duke as neutrally as possible. And he's sort of maintained a kind of ambiguous air about, whether he loved him or hated him. Whereas Michael Sheen is quite keen to portray him, it seems, as this quite divisive character. He comes across as extremely arrogant from the very first words we see Prince Andrew say in this dramatisation. And we must remember it is a dramatisation. It's a fictionalised version of a real event. The very first words we see Michael Sheen as Prince Andrew saying are F off to a footman who's in the way. And he proceeds to be entirely rude and belligerent pretty much throughout the whole 3 parts.
And do we know if that is like Prince Andrew? I mean, is he the kind of person who would tell a footman to F off?
I don't know that there's ever been any official complaints about him. Perhaps there might have been behind the scenes. We certainly know that when an undercover reporter for the Daily Mirror years ago went into work as a footman in Buckingham Palace, he reported such language being used against a very senior footman who had gone in to open the curtains for Andrew one morning and say, "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," to which the response was F off. So we have had anecdotes, we have had reports of these sorts of things in the past. And it strikes me that the people who've produced this programme have clearly done quite a lot of research. The palaces look like inside Buckingham Palace. It's very well put together.
Yes. And obviously there was an enormous backlash to that interview when it landed, and he was sort of dropped like a stone quite quickly.
Within days, it was really the end of his royal life as he knew it.
Tonight, Britain's royal family is in full damage control mode. We won't be seeing Prince Andrew in a public role anytime soon.
Prince Andrew spoke with the Queen and Prince Charles before making his stunning announcement today. In the unprecedented statement, the prince announced he would step back from public duties for the foreseeable future.
He stepped down from official royal duties. And despite being the second son of the sovereign, despite being the favourite son of the late Queen, it seems, there was no room for him when it came to bringing bad press to the palace. So he had to step down with immediate effect from all his official royal duties. And then, of course, that became permanent as time went on.
And even though we did know a lot about Prince Andrew and his connections with Jeffrey Epstein in the past, the paedophile financier, was it the case that interest in that interview and in the story again meant that it was all in the ether again? And so even though there wasn't necessarily lots of new things, fury was kicked up?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it was a terrible idea for Andrew to go on and say what he said, and people could see him sort of squirming and making excuses for himself. He didn't come out and say what a terrible thing it was or admit any kind of bad judgment on his own part. So it did bring it all back into the ether again. And I think that was the kind of catalyst for Virginia Giuffre, who was one of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, to come and start a civil suit against Prince Andrew, which opened a whole new world of trouble for the Duke.
Set out in black and white in court documents filed in America, 3 occasions when Virginia Giuffre alleges she was sexually abused by Prince Andrew.
He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it.
Now, he's always denied that he had sex with Virginia Giuffre, who's one of the victims who was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein for sex for various people that he entertained. And the Duke has always maintained that he's innocent of that. And certainly he's never been proved guilty in criminal court over that. But the civil case, in the end, was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, thought to be several £1 million that Andrew paid to make the case go away.
And in the new drama, it ends with Andrew sort of somewhat alone and lonely. I mean, how has he actually in real life emerged from all of this? I mean, is it a life of sitting in Royal Lodge, doing jigsaws and staring into the middle distance?
Yeah, from all accounts of people I speak to who have some inkling into how he spends his days, there's a lot of television watching. He goes out and rides a horse from time to time. There might be some golf shots in the back garden. Apparently he likes to use an app on his mobile phone to see the planes going over because they're quite close to the airport there at Windsor, and he likes to see where they're going and coming from. He gets food deliveries in from the Windsor Farm Shop, but by and large it's a very quiet life, far away from the big dinners and shoot meets that he used to enjoy, the privilege and his role as a UK trade ambassador where he'd be flying around the world. You know, at one point he was known as Air Miles Andy because he was always on a plane somewhere, jet-setting, hobnobbing, and that all has come to an end. So very much, you know, as I said in the Times, it's kind of life imitating art in the nature of the programme, imitating life, because he is very much an isolated figure. He doesn't have that army of staff around him anymore, not officially for his office.
Kate Mansey, we're talking Prince Andrew back in the spotlight again, not just because of that interview, not because of the Netflix drama, but because of yet another drama, this time on Amazon Prime. You were just explaining for us a moment ago his life at the moment, spending his time on apps, watching television, getting in food deliveries and the rest, without the great retinue of staff he once had. What about his relationships with the rest of the royal family? How damaged and unresolved are they at the moment? I mean, let's start with his brother.
Well, in the show, we see a big kind of set two between Andrew and Charles that's imagined, obviously, for fictional purposes, in which they both seem to be on a phone call calling each other a mummy's boy and both levelling the claim at the other one. But in many ways, their relationship isn't great at the moment. The King has said that he wants Andrew to move out of Royal Lodge. Sources close to the negotiations have described it to me as the siege of Royal Lodge. That's to say, Charles wants him out, Andrew doesn't want to leave.
And the issue is what?
The issue is about having appropriate accommodation and money spent in an appropriate way. I think the King's feeling is that in a world in which everybody's watching their pennies and the cost of living is going up, is it really appropriate that he is spending £5 million plus a year to keep Andrew in Royal Lodge, this vast estate? He's a single man, essentially, living with his ex-wife. Wouldn't it be much more appropriate if Andrew moved to Frogmore Cottage, the former home of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex? That's within the cordon at Windsor, and that's within the security cordon, which would mean that Andrew wouldn't have to have this kind of static, constant security team of 10 people monitoring his address, because it would come under the existing security that's already provided for that area.
So there's a double saving to be made.
That's right, so that he would only need security when he went out and about, rather than that static security that currently has to be put in place for Royal Lodge.
Either way this shakes down, wherever he's living, I mean, he's still expensive.
He is. He has expensive tastes. He likes to go shooting. He likes to go horse riding. And with no real discernible income. So Andrew's get out of jail free card is that he has a lease that's 75 years long on Royal Lodge with the Crown Estate. So he's entitled to stay there, providing he can continue to support himself there. So if he can come up with the money Charles is fine for him to stay there as long as he's funding it himself. Now, there has to be a transparency about where that money comes from, I understand, for that to be the case. And Andrew's saving grace throughout all of this has been, in my mind, his 2 daughters, who are very level-headed. And Princess Beatrice had tried to help guide him through the Newsnight interview and the process surrounding it. But they have stayed loyal throughout. And so has his ex-wife, which, he should hopefully thank his lucky stars for those 3 women around him.
What about Prince William? What's his relationship like with Andrew?
People close to Charles have said to me that if Charles is rather generously offering to maintain a kind of lifestyle for Andrew and offering him a good alternative now, the way they phrase it is that offer may not be as generous if William ascends the throne. So they're not thought to be particularly close. And I don't think William would have any truck for wanting to splurge lots of money of his own private funds on Uncle Andy.
Because wasn't there reporting around the time of Prince Andrew's sort of departure from public life that actually the real hard line in all of this was the now Prince of Wales?
It was certainly a mixed bag that Charles and William were on the same page as far as Andrew not returning to public life in that way. And even the Queen, no matter how beloved Andrew was by the late Queen, she knew that there had to be a hard line. There's no way that he could continue in those roles because the public wouldn't wear it. William and Charles very much of the same mind when it comes to that.
To quote Theresa May, nothing has changed, actually. But for these dramas reigniting interest, it's the same state of affairs broadly ever since that civil case wrapped up. How much of an impact do you think that these have on the royal family and how they think of Andrew and what to do with him?
I think they do have an impact. I think the constant publicity that keeps coming up time and again with Andrew, whether it was the civil suit, whether it was a book based on the interview, whether it was the Netflix show, the Amazon show, this is something that, people are fascinated by. It's not an issue that's going away anytime soon. And although nothing's changed, as you say, in 5 years, there have been kind of manoeuvres behind the scenes. So Andrew had his state-sponsored security removed by the Home Office, and he had sought to try to keep that because that would mean that Charles would then have to fill the void and pay for it privately. So that happened. Then Charles became king, so there was a shift again. And Charles is looking at his legacy. He's looking at how people view him and the institution as a whole, and whether the monarchy should be, even privately, footing the bill for Andrew to live in the lap of luxury, as some might see it, in this huge estate when other people are struggling to pay their rent and their bills.
So talk of Prince Andrew charting a course back to some kind of public life, as was definitely talked about at some point, albeit years ago. Do you think that's definitely off the table now?
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew has for a long time held out this hope that he might be rehabilitated, that his lawyers might be able to do something, that they can make the civil case go away, that, it's a bit like the Newsnight interview, this hope that, he could be reinstated in the public opinion. But that's all gone now. And I think now he finally accepts that that's not an option for him.
Has this changed the royal family, this experience? I mean, especially as it pertains to the Newsnight interview and the way all of this was handled.
Well, look, I don't think anyone's going to be doing a Newsnight interview anytime soon, put it that way. Probably made them more wary. It's definitely been a kind of lessons learnt. But Andrew very much struck out on his own to do this interview. This was not sanctioned by the Queen and the Prince of Wales, now King, at the time, as they weren't pushing for him to do it. This was something that Newsnight came to him. And I think for a while he was thinking, no, this is a bad idea, but was finally persuaded to do it. And I think those close to him were so blindly loyal. So Sarah Ferguson, Amanda Thirsk, who is his private secretary, who we see played a prominent role both in the real drama and the imagined drama that we've seen on our TV screens. They were so blinded by loyalty in a way that they just thought, well, if the world can see Andrew the way that we see Andrew, then they'll fall in love with him and realise that, of course, he had nothing. It was all a terrible mistake and he had nothing to do with any of this business. And just because he'd had a business arrangement with Jeffrey Epstein at some point, well, lots of people did. And if only they could just see him how we see him. But of course, I think there was this kind of the blinkered view of what he was really like and also the kind of a lesson learned for the palace of when you're within the palace, they're in their own little bubble. Certainly in Andrew's apartments and in Andrew's offices, they were in this bubble that he could do no wrong and that it was all going to be fine, without actually listening to what the public thought of the whole debacle.
How damaging is not just the events that these TV shows have depicted and the actual sort of story at the core of it, but the idea that for a good chunk of people, their engagement with the royal family in the past few years has been The Crown, Scoop, A Very Royal Scandal, prominent shows which are spinning a message I'm pretty sure the king is not keen to have out there.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that. So The Crown, and I've written a lot about The Crown as well, that although based on real events, it spins off into fantasy land with imagined dialogue, but with a kind of Hollywood budget. One of the king's friends described it to me once as trolling on a Hollywood budget, The Crown. And I think there's young people who didn't live through some of those times, and they're seeing it for the first time on television depicted in such a beguiling and kind of engaging way that they think, oh, this must be the truth, this must be the way it played out. So I think that is an issue for the royal family. We've also seen Harry and Meghan give their Netflix series as well.
I missed that from the list. Of good point.
But that's also their version of events. We didn't see, the King and William wading in with their side of the story. They have had a strange time in terms of this new sort of onslaught, perhaps is too strong a word for it.
The streaming revolution has not been good for them, it would seem.
No, and how do you counteract that from an institution that's been around for years and years and has done very well by saying as little as possible about its inner workings? Unless now you come out and decide you're going to counteract everything, which then makes a story in itself. They have had to put up with a lot of stuff.
Kate Mansey, assistant editor and royal editor for The Times. You can read more of her reporting at thetimes.com, including all of the news around Prince Harry's 40th birthday. And if you'd like to hear more from Kate, you can download the Royals podcast that she does with her Sunday Times counterpart, Roya Nikar. If you enjoy this episode, leave a review wherever you listen to it, or maybe tweet about it, or even WhatsApp a link to someone who you think might enjoy it as well. The producer was Priyanka Deladia, the executive producer was Will Rowe, and sound design and theme composition was by Maula Seto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.